There are not many drivers in motorsports history that transcend through such disciplines like the man we will talk about today. Not many drivers that we can remember that impact our lives as heavily as this driver did, mainly because we were really able to understand and process his achievements and his accomplishments. Today, we're going to talk about John Andretti.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of Flashback to the Track. And I don't want to say it's a somber episode because we're remembering, a great man, and that should make us happy. We're sad to have lost him, but we're always happy to remember the legacy that is John Andretti.
Yes, from his time in kart to other open wheel ventures, that one time he drove a dragster, to his illustriously long NASCAR career, John Andretti impacted the lives of many a race fan, whether it was his on-track performance or his off-track persona and likability. That's what made John John. There's a lot of stories I've heard about John in the past, a lot more since his passing, and it was a very unfortunate passing that John, the timing of it and just the fact that, he had to pass due to this medical condition. But I think a big thing came from that, which was, go to the doctor, get your health in order, make sure you are doing the best for you. And if anything, his legacy will not only project his motorsports accomplishments, but also impact the lives of others to go to their doctor and keep up with their health.
Yeah, and, John Andretti really, he's kind of remembered by a lot of people who maybe don't know his whole career, maybe just NASCAR fans are kind of like, he won a couple races and that was cool. But when you really dig deep and you look at his career, you see that he had really an incredible career in just auto racing in general, starting in sports cars and going to IndyCar and then going to NASCAR and then going back to IndyCar and having sports cars within there and reinventing himself multiple times because the guy just loved racing, and wanted to race. And he didn't really care what he was racing a lot of the time, as long as he was racing, even drag racing, like you mentioned. So, he really was a great driver. And honestly, if you look at, his finishes towards even the end of his career, he was a very consistent driver.
And that's a big thing about John Andretti that, for a lot of people, it doesn't make you flashy and get the front page of the paper to be Mr. Consistency, but it gets you re-signed and it gets you into a seat for, several years, whether that would be sports cars, because he had an illustrious career in sports cars. He drove prototypes, won the 24 Hours of Daytona, if I'm not mistaken. I know he won the 12 Hours of Sebring.
He won Daytona in '86, I believe. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, it just shows how, and he was a very young driver at that point too. So for a driver like himself, he probably came from like a karting open wheel background, jumped into sports cars, had success, and then didn't just let that define his career. He obviously sought to go to the next endeavor and take that on. His sports car career though is very illustrious, very iconic, but often, overlooked in my eyes. A lot of people forget about the fact that John Andretti had a very successful sports car career.
Yeah, and I think rather than just go through, John's whole career and, do a chronological thing, I think we're really just going to talk about some of the things we remember about John Andretti and what we think is really special. And the first thing that jumps out to me is that, he was the first guy to race in both the Indy 500 and the Coca-Cola 600 on the same day. And not a lot of people know that. People know Tony Stewart did it. They know Robbie Gordon did it. Kurt Busch did it in 2014. But John was the first guy to do it. And that's pretty incredible to have the balls to say, I'm going to do both on the same day.
Yeah,
he did it in 1994.
Not only to just do it, but to, his position that he was in NASCAR, he was still a rookie. So he wasn't really a seasoned veteran of NASCAR to say, I'm going to jump out of this realm that I'm doing and go back into open wheel and try to attempt this double. Unfortunately for John, it didn't work out in the favor of completing all, 1,100 miles. But that's the allure of it. You have to attempt it to at least try to achieve it. And at that time, no one had attempted it. And it was a big deal back then in 1994.
Yeah, and that was really, John's first big accomplishment that people remember him for, and was kind of cool to see someone, try that. And like you said, he was a rookie in NASCAR at the time. He didn't even have a top 10 finish yet at the time. Obviously coming from kart, he had won a kart race in 1991. He did only have 2 kart podiums in his career, but he had a first and a second. Those were his only 2 podiums, but he won a race in Australia actually in 1991 at Surfers Paradise, which is really cool. And then to kind of just lose his IndyCar ride and decide he wanted to reinvent himself, spent 93 drag racing, and then went to NASCAR in 94. So
Yeah, I wish he would have done more in drag racing, but if anything there that came from that drag racing time was the basic hipster girls you'll see nowadays that are wearing retro t-shirts. They're always wearing that Taco Bell Top Fuel John Andretti t-shirt, and it's like, oh, Andretti. It's like, but do you? I mean, there's so much cool history with that.
it's like that's not Mario Andretti, right?
Yeah, he is related, but that is not technically Michael Andretti. So, and
Yeah.
I think that's really cool too. He kind of to speak about that. You think early in his career he would have been lost in the shadow of Michael and Mario because they were very active at the time too. And especially when Michael went to go Formula One racing in I believe that was '93, Mark, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, 1993 he went to McLaren.
Yeah, he topped Michael the very next year by being that first person to do the Indy double and wasn't like lost in the shadow. He defined himself and carved his own path with his famous last name that helped him get places, but you knew who John was.
Yeah, and John kind of developed like as a NASCAR driver, somebody who was obviously like we see a lot of the kart guys, he's very strong on road courses. Even though he doesn't have like the flashiest finishes at road courses, he also always ran strong there. He did that, and he was actually like he developed into a very good restrictor plate driver. He had a pole at Talladega. He won his first race at Daytona in '97 in the summer race, the Firecracker 400. Which is huge, driving for Cale Yarborough's team. So, he's driven for some great owners too. Think of it like Roger Penske, Dale Earnhardt Incorporated. He's driven for Cale Yarborough. So a lot of, famous names in the sport he's driven for. But, those were kind of like the tracks where he really, really excelled.
Oh, no doubt. I think if you really look back at his career, the one area, if I've got to really like pinpoint, like the first time I remember John Andretti in NASCAR was Kraniff's Haas team, the iconic 37 purple Kmart Little Caesar pizza car. I thought that was the coolest looking car on track. John Andretti was such a competitive driver. I remember the 1996 Daytona 500. I have no idea why I remember that race more so than anything with John Andretti for quite some time. And he was a competitive driver in that race. He was up in the front in the top 10, contending for a top 5. Unfortunately, his inexperience got the best of him, and he ended up crashing out of that race. But it showed, like Mark said, that he was a very strong restrictor plate racer. And he was, in this time of NASCAR, this was a time too when you would sometimes hop back and forth from ride to ride because you might lose your value to one car owner, but then someone else sees the value that they can pick up, because their team might not be on the same level as that team, or you might bring new ideas to help their team. And there's always like this balancing act, which is crazy because if you look at 1996 specifically, John was with Kraniff, and he had a top 5 in his final race, which was Darlington, the Southern 500. And then he was released the very next week. It's like you have the best finish of your year, and you have to accept the fact that one team doesn't want you, but this new door opens to go over to run for Cale Yarborough Motorsports, and you take it. And he did, and he like made the best of it. Obviously, like had a good run for the rest of that season, and then the very next year he, gets his first ever win at Daytona, the track that he was trying to really contend with, and almost won the Daytona 500. At least had a good run. But I think if we move on to the next chapter, because we're not trying to go in chronological order, we're just trying to go in an order where we think people remember John. I'd say that blue and yellow Richard Petty 43, the Cheerios car. I feel like that's where a lot of other fans really remember John Andretti.
Yeah, myself included. So like when I started really watching NASCAR, John Andretti had already kind of gone into his like sort of semi-forced retirement mode. But I remember playing the video games, NASCAR Thunder 2003 and that, and like there was, those lightning challenges where you had to win Martinsville with John Andretti, because he was on old tires at the end of the race, and he got that win in 1999, which is just awesome. to see, the only race that he won for the King, but it was an incredible win, and he had a really good season in 99, and 98. 98, he finished 11th in points. That was the best points finish he ever had. But those years driving that Cheerios car, like, that's such an iconic paint scheme to people. Like, they really remember it. Obviously, Richard Petty Motorsports is always going to be associated with STP as a sponsor, but that Cheerios car was just like in a league of its own, and everyone is always going to remember that car.
If they don't throw back to that car this year, I think they've failed. They missed the mark at the opportunity.
I think you're going to see somebody probably throw back to the Cale Yarborough Motorsports car as well, the RCA car. I think that'll probably happen.
That'd be a good one.
But I hope they do the Cheerios one too, man. That'd be awesome. Everybody should just do a John Andretti throwback.
Yeah, just like, I think there's enough. Oh man, can you imagine Ryan Preece, the 37 car with that 37 Kmart Little Caesars car? Jeez.
Be amazing. Well, yeah, they had Cheerios on Chris Buescher's car last year, the 37. So, like, they could maybe do the Cheerios paint scheme.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. That's all you can say. It's just maybe. It's you hope that at least Richard Petty Motorsports would do it, where they just take the 43 and put Victory Junction Gang Camp on like some design that mimics Cheerios, or hell, I think it's even better like when the sponsor really wants to come back and do it, kind of like John Deere with Ricky.
Yeah, that was awesome when John Deere came back to do that. That was really cool. Like,
yeah,
because that's kind of the thing we lose with throwbacks, right? A lot of the time is that the sponsors are different, and they still look cool, but it's great that John Deere wanted to come back and do that, because that one stole the show that year. That's such an iconic paint scheme.
Yeah, it's just about being period perfect. I think, Mark, a very interesting time for John Andretti that we both wish we could have talked to him about was when he went to DEI.
Yeah, so he went to DEI in 2003 after, I believe it was after the Jeff Green, Steve Park trade that happened between RCR and DEI, and then Jeff Green got let go from DEI, and they signed John Andretti, and like, he had some pretty good runs, man. He had 12th, the 14th, and that was in a very competitive field back in the Gen 4 era. So there was like 25, 30 competitive cars, and so he had some pretty good runs. And then kind of like ran part-time for them over the next couple years and ran pretty well, man. Finished 13th in the 2004 Daytona 500, like a 19th at Charlotte, a 16th at Chicago. So he did pretty well.
Yeah, for the very limited time that he was able to run. Because I mean, you think about that. Yeah, Daytona is the first race out of the gate, but between, I believe, what was his next race, which was Rockingham, the second race of the year, and Charlotte, which was God knows how many races down the line, he was not in the car. He was disconnected from competition, from the team, from everything. He wasn't, in competition mode. Obviously, he was probably a test driver too, because back then testing was unlimited. You could do what you want. And he was probably going to Nashville and Memphis and all these other tracks closer to the DEI headquarters, helping develop what was probably one of the most dominant eras of Dale Earnhardt Incorporated and towards the end of 2003 and 2004, and we saw that translate to Dale Jr. having a lot of on-track success, Michael Waltrip having a lot of on-track success. Mainly, I would attest a lot of that to John Andretti being there and being able to provide the support and offer his abilities to be a test driver probably as well. It's crazy to think about. And then you move over to 2005, and for a lot of drivers, he still had to take a hit, and he had to run a partial schedule. He was in the 14 PPC Racing Ford Taurus. I remember that car. It was like a silver and orange car, looking crazy. Had like a convenience store for a sponsor, and I was like, okay, yeah, this is interesting for John. But the very next year was probably one of the most interesting years because he became a rookie in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, back then the Busch Series. Driving for PPC Racing in the number 10 Camping World car. Mark, you have some fond memories of this too, because this is probably like your first year or two watching the NASCAR schedule.
Yeah, man, that's like one of the first. So 2005 is the first year I really watched closely, but 2006 is like I'm in like an encyclopedia on NASCAR in 2006. Like I remember everything. And when John Andretti declared to be a rookie, That was amazing. It rubbed a lot of people the wrong way because he had like 400 cup starts or something like that.
Yeah.
But here's the thing: he'd only ever run one Busch Series race, so he gets to be a rookie. And back then, they had rookie practice. It was an extra 20 minutes just for rookies. So he got rookie practice and he got an extra set of tires for the weekend, which you got as a rookie. So that's pretty amazing. And yeah, he just took a step down that year. It was like, you know what, full time ride, fully sponsored. That was the first time Camping World sponsored a car too, which is really interesting. And then they became like the new Menards of NASCAR and just sponsored like everybody. Like over the next 3 or 4 years, Camping World was on almost every car at some point. But yeah, he goes to the Busch Series that year, and he only had 4 top 10s and a fifth place finish at the Glen. That was his best finish. But like, it was a good year for him, man, to get back in there. He finished 12th in points. He unfortunately did not win Rookie of the Year, but Danny O'Quinn Jr. I think beat him by 1 point for Rookie of the Year. So, curse that Danny O'Quinn Jr. But what are you gonna do? And
Bastard.
yeah, that was, man, John's 2006 in the Xfinity Series was just like straight baller, man. You're watching like John Andretti drive at like Gateway and IRP, on like a Saturday night, and man, those were the days.
They were so cool. My favorite race was probably Milwaukee, um, which was a crapshoot. And I think he had his best run at Milwaukee, a track that he's had experience in kart. He's coming back to this track, trying to prove himself as an Xfinity Series, as a Busch Series regular. It's one of those more or less standalone Busch Series races. Gets caught up in a late race incident, and he comes down pit road to get his car fixed. And then you just see 3 or 4 of his crewmen with like sledgehammers beating the back trunk and deck lid down to try to get the spoilers some air. It's just so iconic. It's one of those silly scenes, and that was John Andretti then. I mean, he had a sick looking livery too. That number 10 Camping World Ford was it's pretty on point. I love the number choice too, and the font and the style, but unfortunately,
And he was teammates with Kenny Wallace.
yeah,
Like,
the 22
that's awesome.
AutoZone car.
Yeah, him and
Damn.
Kenny, man, were teammates. What a great duo. But then, unfortunately, after 2006, we get like the start and park crappy car era John Andretti, which is not great. But, he wanted to race, and he drove for some really bad teams like Front Row Motorsports, which, if you don't know, Front Row Motorsports, folks, back in the day was like really bad. They barely qualified for races, and they were not good racing multiple different manufacturers. Sometimes they were a Chevy, sometimes they were a Dodge. It just didn't go very well.
No, and they would their sponsor was always like some kind of chain of Taco Bell franchises or Long John Silver's, like they never really had a legit sponsor. I think John helped bring one of the most legit sponsors to them, which was Window World at the time.
Yeah. He actually had a long partnership with Window World, and the Andretti family still has a partnership with Window World. They sponsor their SRO GT4 effort that John's son Jarrett drives. So Window World's still involved with the family, and that's probably just because of John's like glowing personality and just being a fun person to be around. You know what I mean? Like people want to stay with people like that.
Yeah, and you want to test that relationship. John was able to start another Indy 500, his last Indy 500. I'm not blanking on a year right now. I apologize. 2011, excuse me. He ran the Indy 500, and he ran it before in 2010. It just didn't fare well. But in 2011, this was like a combination effort between Andretti Autosport and Richard Petty, and he started in the number 43. Window World, Honda powered Delara, and that was the coolest thing ever. You see this, iconic homage, Richard Petty paint scheme, number 43, John Andretti. It was just like your childhood when you used to watch John in the 43, and especially the STP 43. Just crazy to see that, and I don't know if that brought any feelings to you, Mark, but man, that was kind of cool, especially because he had to qualify his way in. It was kind of a little tense and stressful.
Yeah, I think he went to bump day multiple times. So he actually went back to the Indy 500 for the first time in 2007. He drove for Panther Racing, and then he drove for Roth Racing in 2008, and then actually stayed in IndyCar for 4 more races after that. So he drove all ovals. Actually, he stayed for 4 more oval races in Milwaukee, Texas, Iowa, and Richmond. And then he did the Indy 500 actually 5 years in a row, and Unfortunately, we didn't get another double. Would have been great if he tried the double again.
Hmm.
But he did take the Darlington and Charlotte weeks off of NASCAR in '08 and '09 to go. Because if you're not familiar with the Indy 500, qualifying is a week before the race. So if you're going to do it properly, you need to focus on your IndyCar ride, and you have to miss that race the week before the Indy 500 to qualify. So Kurt Busch obviously found a way around it. But 2009 as well, John was running full time for Front Row Motorsports in the 34 Chevy, which is kind of their first year as a semi-competitive team. They had some support from DEI, or I guess it was Earnhardt Childress at the time. They had a little bit of support from them in engines and cars, but they still didn't have the greatest finishes, but they were, at least a little bit better, and they had owner points, so they were locked into all the races. So that was the first time that ever happened to them. But so John was really like their first real full driver. And then in 2010, he drove for them at the Daytona 500, and then we never saw John in NASCAR again. So just did one more IndyCar start, and then he was retired from racing.
Yeah, and that's kind of where John's racing career ends. I mean, and as far as what we want to dig up about him, because that's just the way it is. That's how much John Andretti drove. To me, I really wish more people would highlight John's success in sports cars, IMSA TP and Rolex Sports Car Series, because he did compete at the beginning of his career and midway towards the end of his career in sports cars, and it's something that is overlooked, especially how talented he was. And it's a very testing kind of form of motorsports, because you have to share a car, and for him to be so successful, especially on a Porsche 962, one of the most iconic prototypes in American history and racing history, he was able to be successful with Bob Wilker and Derek Bell as his co-drivers.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, in 2008, he returned to sports car racing, the Rolex 24 in Grand Am, and he was part of an all IndyCar lineup. It was Ed Carpenter, AJ Foyt the fourth, and Vitor Mira. So they were like this all IndyCar team, and that was the last time he did the 24 Hours of Daytona. Unfortunately, they finished 25th. They crashed out in the night, but at least they got to go and be this all IndyCar team, which is kind of cool. But he also won a 6-hour GT race at Watkins Glen with Kyle Petty as his co-driver in 2001, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's probably one of the coolest things. I think they drove a Ferrari for that race, and it's just a lost fact, because it was kind of a dark time for Petty, and very dark time for NASCAR with 2001. But it's
I think
something
we mentioned that in our first ever episode when we did the Watkins Glen. Our second episode, we did the Watkins Glen 2001. I think we mentioned that because I think it was like the day before the race. They won that race.
And we always
or
have
like on the
facts
Friday or something.
Yeah. it's probably one of the coolest victories probably Kyle Petty's ever had, because
and that race is on YouTube. You can find that race. I've watched it.
Yeah, it's a good race. I don't know. We should maybe review that this year coming up. But
6
we
hours.
spoiled
man.
the ending.
I don't know.
Hey, we got 6 hours. We almost did a 24-hour with Daytona once.
Yeah, well,
I gotta ask, as we're gonna wrap it up here, what was your favorite John Andretti ride?
My favorite car that John Andretti ever drove, I would have to go with either that 43 Indy car. That's just so cool. But I really liked the number 1 Coca-Cola C2 car that he drove in 2004 at Daytona. Absolutely loved that. I thought it was amazing. It was a race when like every Coca-Cola driver had a Coca-Cola paint scheme, and it was the Pepsi 400.
Yep, like Coca-Cola, like
that would never happen now. NASCAR would never allow it now.
Oh, but I mean, come on, you got to have like a nice gamesmanship between Coke and Pepsi, and I thought that was kind of clever, because in the grand scheme of things, Coke comes to Daytona swinging for the fences. They got how many bullets in there in the Pepsi 400? Like 10 cars that have Coca-Cola C2 paint schemes, and in the end, it's that one Pepsi car that wins the Pepsi sponsored race. I thought that was hilarious.
It's because Jeff Gordon's the GOAT. But anyway, we're not talking about Jeff Gordon. But yeah, that's probably my favorite John Andretti ride. That, or the one time he drove a Toyota in the Xfinity Series, the one race he drove in 2007 in the 10 Camping World Car at Daytona. I just love that, how that Toyota looks, and with that paint scheme on it, it was just really cool. So What about you, man?
Oh man, I gotta think about this. It's tough because you can always say any of the RCR car, not see me, any of the Richard Petty Motorsports cars are so iconic. I mean, you can go with the 94, excuse me, the 1998 through 1999 paint scheme. The first time they did the Cheerios paint scheme when it was a Pontiac in 2000, I always thought that was cool. But I really love the Haas car. That to me was like my first time I really remember John Andretti. I had like a 1/64 scale car. I'd play around with it all the time. I thought it was the coolest looking one. That, and when he drove for DEI, and he had probably the Daytona 500 paint scheme when he did the post Maxwell House car. It was like a blue and white car. I love
Oh
that.
yeah, that's right.
So beautiful looking, like the red number on the blue, and then the co-sponsorship. You know, you have two brands on there. It's not just one, and then they split it up so well. And then he also ran some really cool Dale Earnhardt Incorporated like tribute paint schemes, and it was like DEI insignia on the front, and it had snap-on tools on the quarter panels. Like those were some cool ones. I think he did a red one and a white one at some point during the season as well. So those really stood out to me, and I think it's probably because they resonated the most with me.
What about the number 90 AOL 9.0 car that he drove for
Oh,
Richard Childress Racing?
it's 9.0. What number? 90.
90, of
Perfect.
course.
Yeah,
Got it. Awesome.
you don't see that anymore where you have like the sponsor throw in like the number to really resonate with like what's going on. But yeah, that was a good one. I gotta find that one now. I mean, I'd really like some like die cast of these cars, but you're gonna have to like spend an arm and a leg having custom die cast be made.
Yeah, that's the thing. And like custom diecast I find are just not very collectible. Like they're cool to have in your house, but like if you're actually like collecting them to be collectibles, like you know what I mean? Like there's
There's
not a
no
lot of
value.
it's not a lot of resale value, but come
Yeah.
on, if you're collecting things just for resale value, like what's the point? You know?
Mhm. I think too another fun fact we might have overshadowed it here. John Andretti made some truck starts. He actually made starts for Billy Blue Motorsports from 2006 and excuse me, from 2005, and then again in 2008. And he was actually really successful in the truck. He finished ninth at Kansas, eighth in Memphis, and 11th at Nashville in 2005. And in
Yeah, he
2008,
he
he
filled
finished,
in at like all the weird races.
yeah,
Like the
like
ones that
Kyle
like
didn't really
aren't
go.
yeah, the ones that Kyle Busch couldn't drive for them. They just like they got man, they had some weird drivers that year. Like they had I think everybody drove for I'm gonna look it up now. That's a really
I
interesting
remember, I
fact.
remember you see Paul Menard drove at Bristol, and yeah, I mean there were
Yeah,
a
I
lot.
think Truex drove at Milwaukee, I think, and actually had like a really, really bad race. Like he was just slow.
Mm,
Yeah, I need to look this up. So Billy, thank you to Racing Reference because you are the reason that we can do this.
thanks, NASCAR.
So yeah, NASCAR man, thank you. So in 2005, his drivers were John Andretti, Kyle Busch, Kerry Earnhardt, Blake Feast, David Gilliland, Shane Hamill, Johnny Sauter, and Martin Truex Jr. They all
Wow,
drove at least one race in that car.
you had
So
nobody David
truck,
Gilliland
sorry,
in that
truck.
truck.
And Kyle Busch
That's
won 3 times. So there you go.
sorry everyone, you got bushed. Um, something kind of sad. Thinking about it now since St. Pete Grand Prix is coming up. I saw John walk around the paddock last year.
I was just gonna ask you that if you ever saw John, you know.
I did there because obviously his son Jarrett was running the SRO race, and I don't know if he's still running a McLaren now, but he was running a McLaren last season and doing really well at it. I think he won a race and started to prove himself and edge his name as far as being a member of the Andretti racing family. And I saw John there walking through the paddock, being very hands-on and supportive of his son. And you didn't think that his health was going to be diminished by this time. The very next year, it's just kind of unfortunate, but that's just the way cancer goes.
Yeah, I saw John at Watkins Glen in the fall of last year. Again at an SRO race. I was there at the race with my dad, and we were watching on like a screen in the media center. And my dad was like, I went to the washroom, and I came back. My dad's like, "Oh, Mario Andretti is here." And I'm like, "I think you mean like John Andretti, Dad." He's like, "Yeah, well, one of the Andrettis is here." And so I ended up seeing him like around later, and like honestly, like I should have gone over and said hello and shook his hand. I wanted to, but like I was there shooting photos, and like I'm very protective of like, being
You can't.
professional,
We're
and
not
like
here to rekindle our friendships, Mark.
I know, I know. We're not here to pretend to be friends with people at the autograph session. But like it's I didn't want to do that, and sometimes I'm shy and sometimes I'm not, and like I don't really get starstruck, but like it's John Andretti, and I was like a big fan of his when I was a kid, and like it's I just wussied out, and I didn't say hello to him, and I should have, and now he's gone, and I really wish I had. So you know it is what it is, as Juan Pablo Montoya would say. So
That's
you
the way of
know,
the road, man.
away she goes.
That's the
So
way she goes.
it's unfortunate, but I wish I'd said hello to him. No, especially just knowing what he was going through, and how crappy that is. Like I've lost loved ones to cancer, several, so it's very tough. But I'm always going to remember John, not as that, but as just an incredible race car driver and someone that maybe a lot of people didn't appreciate enough at the time. Is really kind of what I'll take from it. Is
Hmm.
that this guy was a great race car driver, and people really only started realizing it after he passed away and they looked up his stats.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like we said, he wasn't the showboaty guy that was winning the races and getting the front page headlines, but he was the consistent guy that would always be in the seat and have a ride the very next year, and that's what made him transcend as long as he did, and probably what makes us look back at him and understand what kind of driver he was. Um, I'm going to end it on one funny note now. Bring it back to something cool. Fun fact: 1998, John Andretti is going to start the Bud Shootout. But the problem is, in 1997, when John Andretti won a pole, Richard Petty does not run alcohol sponsorships on the car. Those little decals on there, he didn't run like a Budweiser decal, and that's because his mama never wanted him to run an alcoholic brand. Okay, it's all right if you run cigarettes and whatnot, but I guess I'm not allowed to run alcohol. So John Andretti got to run the Bud Shootout for Rick Hendrick in the number 50. I believe it's actually the 25 car. Actually, they didn't swap to 50 yet until like the season started, but he drove the number 25 Rick Hendrick Budweiser Chevrolet in the 1998 Bud Shootout. That's probably always my favorite John Andretti fun fact.
I did not know that.
You know, I saw a car on eBay for sale one night, and I was like, "What is this?" And I looked it up, and I was like, "You are kidding me! That's right. Yeah, he doesn't like to run those decals, and that's why, some people didn't never that drove for Richard Petty never got the chance, and you know, uh, Rick had the opportunity for John to drive it, and he drove it.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, color me surprised. I had no idea, but that's really cool. I'd like to
Yeah.
find a picture. I gotta find a picture of that car because that's pretty cool. That's a fun fact. I might steal that one. Take that one for myself.
Oh, God! My ideas have been stolen. That's okay.
Yeah,
We
I'm taking
share.
that one.
Sharing is caring.
It's all about collaboration. It's
Yeah,
key.
you get the Twitter market. I'll get the Instagram, Facebook market.
And then one day we'll just rule the NASCAR world.
Yes,
We're
yes,
coming for
brain.
you, NASCAR YouTubers. We're coming for you. So
Yeah, yeah. We already got them on lockdown though.
that's true.
They think we're on a pedestal because we get free food from the media center. Fun fact: the free food's garbage.
Fun
No
fact:
offense.
free food is not great unless you're at Texas Motor Speedway, where it's
Yes,
delicious.
always they bow down to Texas Motor Speedway. Fans might think it's a bad looking race when you're on Twitter, commenting on it from your living room. But if you're in Texas, go to Fort Worth, go to that track. I don't care if it's an IndyCar weekend, truck weekend, stadium super truck weekend. Go to Texas Motor Speedway. It's a pretty cool place.
John Andretti, just a great man, and I think he's always going to be remembered as a great man. And brought a tear to my eye, watching them take him for one last ride around Indianapolis Motor Speedway. I thought that was incredible. Um, that was very moving to see, and that was just incredible. It was just incredible. That's all I have to say, And is there anything else you want to add, James, before we end this episode about the great John Andretti?
Hey, it doesn't matter who you are, how old you are, and make sure you go to your doctor, get yourself checked out, make sure your health's in good order, because it's only up to you. You only got one life, you only got one bill of health, so make sure you keep it clean, keep it
Yeah,
keep it
that's
ready.
that's the thing, guys. Like if something feels weird, go to the hospital, go to the doctor.
Yep.
Don't put it off. You never know what it might be. I'm not saying live your life terrified, But you know what? If something's felt weird for a while, go see the doctor.
Yeah, get yourself checked out.
Be something serious. So,
all you gotta do is make sure your bases are covered. Hashtag check it for Andretti, and go on eBay, go find yourself a John Andretti thing that makes you happy, and get it, and put it somewhere in your house, and always remember John Andretti, because he's going to be a driver that will be undervalued, underappreciated for quite some time, and it'll give us some time. But I'll say it, Mark. One day John Andretti will be in the NASCAR Hall of Fame.
I would say so. Probably. I hope so.
Yeah.
I think. I think he makes it at the rate we're putting people in, for sure. So, I hope he's in there. And just a couple of housekeeping things before we take off. We were both at the Daytona 500, and we managed to get an interview with one of I'd say the most legendary NASCAR photographers, Brian Cleary, and that was amazing to sit with him and have a burger. Shout out to Custom Built Burgers at One Daytona. But yeah, we had a great chat with Brian. That podcast will come out soon. Don't know if it'll be the next episode. We've recorded a lot of things that aren't timely, so we're just gonna kind of put them out, whenever we feel like putting them out. So still have to edit that one, but that'll come out soon, and you can hear an awesome interview with Brian Cleary. Really hope the sound quality's good on that. I have no idea.
I feel like we're gonna hear a lot of music, but hey, it's okay.
Yeah, it might get blocked because you're gonna hear Kesha in the background, but whatever, that's fine.
We'll try to do something at least once a week, whether we stay on the schedule of NASCAR, the schedule of IndyCar, schedule of sports cars. We won't really know. We're just really trying to have fun and enjoy producing these pieces for you guys, because if we know we're having fun making them, you'll definitely have fun listening to them and enjoy them and want more from us. And that's our goal.
Yeah. So on that note, this has been Flashback to the Track. My name is Mark, and you can find me on Twitter at Facts NASCAR.
And you can find me at I Want to Believe NASCAR. My name is James. Just search me up. I have nothing to hide. It's a burner account. So what? You can find my other social media handles through my burner account, and you can see all the work that myself and Mark have been doing, especially within sports cars and NASCAR and all forms of motorsports. That's what we like to do. We like to have fun. We like to enjoy our jobs. But yeah,
that has been Flashback to the Track. We'll see you in the next episode.
Have a good one.